The County of San Diego is the lead agency requesting a public input regarding the preparation of a draft environmental impact report for the proposed Cedar and Kettner property development project pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. The notice of preparation is to solicit input as to the scope and content of the draft EIR, and that is the purpose of tonight's discussion. The area of interest for the Historic Site Board is the proposed demolition of an existing structure known as the three-story Star Builders Supply Company building, a city-designated historic structure. According to the description, demolition is necessary as a part of Phase 1 of the project to ensure that the parking structure is sited and constructed in a manner that supports both existing and projected needs for the county operations activities. I have a note here. Another proposed project at the very same location was presented to the board on September 20th, 2004, an MND for county offices and parking structures that would not impact the historic Star building. We do not know what the outcome of that action was, and I'm sure that we'll find out. The public scoping meeting for this NOP and the associated draft EAR has been scheduled for Wednesday, April 20th from 4 to 5:30 at the San Diego County Administration Building, Tower 6. That's right downtown at the county building. I wanted to mention that because everyone is invited to attend that meeting. As a reminder, tonight, this project is a discussion item on our agenda. Therefore, we cannot take any action at this meeting. However, based on the discussion tonight, board members can respond individually to the NOP in writing or by attending the meeting. This item will likely be brought back to the board when the EIR goes out for public review. Action can be taken by the board at that time. To discuss the proposed Cedar and Kettner project, we have with us Lisa Luto, to my left, project manager with BRG Consulting, and Davia Lynch with the county's Department of General Services. Davia?
Well, thank you for having us here this evening. I appreciate your time. As Gail stated, this is an informational item, and we wanted to come to you as early as possible and talk with you about the proposed project. So our purpose, as stated, is really to present to you the environmental process. I'm sure you're all extremely savvy about the CEQA process, but to present to you where we are today in that process, what our upcoming steps are, and of course the project overview, and most importantly to receive your comments and input and those of the public who are attending this evening. I want to state up front that we have put forward some comment forms. If anyone in the audience would like to utilize those and submit those during the scoping period, they're certainly here to do that, and you can hand those to me or Alyssa tonight as well. So I'll start with the project background and overview. In 2003, an EIR was certified for the County Administration Center Waterfront Park. You're probably familiar with that project based on recent newspaper articles and so on. It's a proposal to eliminate the 2 large surface parking lots downtown at the County Administration Center and turn those into green spaces for public use. Obviously, that will eliminate the surface parking at those locations. There will be some below-grade parking located at the waterfront park, but based on the EIR prepared in 2003, it was determined that there will be additional parking needed off-site. The county does own the location. I'll show you in a slide or two here of this site, and part of the purpose of this project is to provide parking for that waterfront park and the users of the County Administration Center, the staff. Thanks, that's okay. We anticipate funding for the waterfront park hopefully this year. We do not have official word on the funding, but we're very optimistic about it, and there's been quite a bit of public communication about that from our elected officials. So we expect that to be coming in the near term, which is why we're preparing this EIR at this time. And I think the other component is that this will be a 2-phase project, which again I'll talk about in a moment, but one element is to provide public parking, and the second component, which will be phase 2, will hopefully provide private development potential, which will ultimately provide funding for the county and the waterfront park and other similar uses. So with all this background information and the fact that we obviously have a project under CEQA's definition, that was our kickoff to the EIR process. I think we've indicated that tonight our purpose is to hear your comments. We anticipate you may have comments of the historical nature. We want to get your comments about environmental impacts, some alternatives we may look at. We haven't fully identified what those alternatives are, and we expect that this evening in the Historic Sites Board would be an excellent place to get some input on those alternatives to reduce impacts, and those may be historical or of various other natures. So let me tell you a little bit about the project. You may all be familiar with the site location. It's downtown. It's within the CCDC project area, also within the city of San Diego, but it is a county-owned site between Cedar and Beech Streets to the north and south. It's between Kettner Boulevard and Pacific Highway east and west. The site's currently full of surface parking, the Star Building, which we will talk about, and I think that's the primary uses on the site today. The next few slides are photos of the Star Building. This shows the warehouse. I believe that's an accurate statement, but this is the Star Building from the south side, and this is the rear of the building, actually a component of the warehouse, and the C&R Transport Company information that you see is actually on the Star Building warehouse, or the Star Builders building, excuse me. The lower lying feature is the warehouse itself, which we came to you in 2004 to discuss and is not historically significant per the historical assessment done at that time and the Historic Site Board recommendation. Here's one last photo from the trolley, and that's really just to give you a sense of the building. It was put on the Historic Register in 1991, the state's historical register by the city of San Diego. Excuse me, the city's historical register is not on the state register. The building was built in 1911 and has been used for multiple different purposes, including originally a lumber and cement factory, then on to be a furniture warehouse, and I believe it was also a beer company at one point. So that's some history on the building. Our proposal does show that the building would be demolished under the preferred project. A number of reasons for that under the project description are in part to provide comprehensive availability on the site for project development. Again, that would be partially public, partially private. There's also, not identified in the project description at this time, but we are aware of contaminants on the site. And we do want to be able to have the opportunity to remediate the full site in one effort, and we are looking into that further. A little bit about our process and timing. We're currently in the scoping process, as you know, determining the project and what the various components will be based on input from the community. And that's going to go until the end of April. The end of our scoping period is April 27th, and we will, of course, be analyzing the input from everybody at that time. We anticipate having a draft EIR available for public review and also coming back to the Historic Sites Board in in summer or early fall of this year. And we're hoping to have the final EIR provided in the winter of 2011 and ultimately to go to our Board of Supervisors in early 2012, the first quarter, to request their approval of the project. So that's our anticipated timeline. We have laid out the various CEQA issue areas where there may be impacts under the analysis that we're performing. Again, historic buildings, we do anticipate a significant impact under the preferred project, and we will be analyzing alternatives without demolition of the Star Building. Our next steps, I think I've outlined those to review all the input from the scoping process. We do have several other meetings you may be interested in, as Alyssa mentioned, or Gail mentioned. April 20th, we have a public scoping meeting. That is a public meeting everyone's invited to. We will be going over much of the same information. April 28th, we'll also be meeting with the City Historic Resources Board. To be clear, the city is the body that did identify this as a designated historic building, so we will be going to them with this item as well. We're currently working on a traffic study. We anticipate that will be complete at the end of the summer this year. Again, draft EIR in summer, fall, final in the fall of 2011, and winter. So I think that's the extent of our presentation. Wanted to be short and simple, and certainly emphasize that our purpose in being here is to get your comments and questions this evening. In terms of any comments or questions that you would like to formally submit, please send those to Alyssa, and we'll provide our information, and it is in the NOP and I'm always available for phone calls and emails. Gail and Chairman, I'm available for questions.
We'll go to board comment. Or any, do any board members have any questions at all for county staff or any speakers? We'll just go this way down the road. So we'll go Carmen first.
Yeah, if you don't mind, off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with the project, but as a native of San Diego, both as a citizen and as a prehistory person here, I think we have little historic stuff left. If this is already on the historic sites listing, then why on earth are we tearing it down for a parking lot? I don't understand that kind of ugliness. So that's basically all I want to say for right now. Thank you.
Vicki?
I have several questions, actually. Where is she?
We were going to ask you to come back up.
Could you elaborate a little bit more? We heard a little bit about the art walk and some of the current uses in the building.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. The primary use in the building, it's a fairly small building. I believe it's 2,500 square feet. I'll have to double check that. But the current use is public county use. It's the public safety group of the County of San Diego. It's primarily their staff. The gentleman who wrote in is correct. The lower floor is utilized by art walk currently. And of course, they would be communicated with appropriately as we move forward.
Okay, and has it been seismically retrofitted?
I would have to double check on that. I know that there has been some retrofitting of the building, and I believe it was 2000. I'll double check on the timing, and I think that there was some seismic retrofitting, but I do not know the extent of that. Okay. But I will get back to you on that.
Gail, you mentioned that previously, before us, was this project with the difference being that the historic building was left intact. Can you elaborate on? And that's the other big question. I don't see a project. I don't see a site plan. I don't know what it is that, all I see is here's a project site. Before I can actually make an accurate judgment, I like to see what is it that you're proposing, how does it fit in context. And I'm not sure how BRG can actually do an adequate visual or aesthetic analysis of that, knowing what the design is, unless there is one you haven't shown it to us. So if you can elaborate on that.
Yes, certainly. And we will have, the reason we do not have a site plan available this evening is that we have not developed one. We are currently working with Carrier Johnson to develop some different alternatives. So we are working on that in terms of what the site development may look like. We do know, generally speaking, that we do want to have the site available again for the parking garage, probably closer to Cedar, and some other development potential on the site. So we do not have a full site development plan available.
What has changed? That you've increased the parking requirements over the last
No, the parking requirements have not changed. A number of things have changed. The county would like to see the full site available for development, and I think one of the primary factors is that there is contamination throughout the site that we understand, ground contamination, based on some of the underground storage tanks that were previously on the site. Our objective is to, well, not our project objective, let me clarify, but we do recognize that that will be an issue requiring remediation, and it would not make sense for us to remediate only a portion of the site.
Why would that be?
Understanding that we do need to clean up the full site ultimately. So that is one of the factors that we are looking at with the preferred project at this time.
Okay, I've got some comments and some questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the comments, we have a copy. Actually, it's on the internet on the city's website of the city's minutes of their what they then called the historic site board. It's the Historic Resources Board now.
Mm-hmm.
From 1991, when the property was designated by the city with the county support. So, and at that time there was talk of development of the parcel, but the building was going to be preserved. In 2003, when the waterfront park came before this board, again, the parcel was going to be developed, but the building was going to be preserved. And it kind of stretches my credulity that something's happened in the past few years that while this building could be preserved in 91, it could be preserved in 2003, suddenly it can't be. I guess I'm kind of following on Vicki's comment. If there's such a vague definition of what the project is at this point, how the demolition of the building can be stated as being a requirement. For one thing, the notice says that there's going to be a 10-level parking garage built. And I'm not even sure if the county is not sure what the project 2 is, whether it's going to be a kind of, I guess, a mid-rise type project or a high-rise. How in the world can you build a parking garage designed to take the loads that might be a high-rise or might be a mid-rise? It seems like you need to have that information now in order to design the garage.
Those are some of the challenges that we're currently working on. A secondary factor in terms of building the garage to address the needs of a private development, that's not necessarily something that we are capable of doing as a public agency. So we're trying to figure out those various components and how those will fit together, and once we have those site plans available, we'll provide them. In terms of the factors driving the preferred project at this time, incorporating the demolition of the Star Building, one component is the anticipated economic elements of that and the county's need to recuperate funding to be able to pay for the waterfront park and various other elements and activities that the county is involved with, all for public good. So that is one anticipated factor. We have engaged Kaiser Marston to perform an economic analysis, and we will, of course, analyze the various alternatives that come out of this meeting and that we develop from that point.
I believe it's the same firm that justified demolition of the Edgemore complex.
That is the firm that we hired for that project. That is correct.
Okay. I for one, would, let's see, reading my notes, I mean, I think in my opinion, any proposal that's going to demolish the building, I would like to see in there an alternative that's developed by an architectural firm with experience in adaptive reuse, seriously looking at the project and saying, we considered everything and we can't find a way that you can preserve the building. Getting some firm that's not, and I'm thinking, for example, locally of Heritage,
But not necessarily Heritage.
Yes, that's an example. But some outfit that's familiar with doing this kind of project and working to preserve a building rather than to follow up on somebody's financial goals from the project. To see a serious defense of demolition and a serious thing. I also have one of the things that causes me a little bit of question here is that the scope of the parking lot is so big that you can say that the goal is somewhere between 600 and 1,100 parking spaces. So clearly the loss of the square footage for the building is not, if that were, there aren't 500 parking spaces where that building would be, so that's not a driver.
No, I think it's not necessarily the thought that the parking lot alone or the parking structure alone would need to utilize that space. I think it's a comprehensive development approach.
And procedurally, one other question, you say that the EIR would be available in summer to fall. This board meets in July and it meets again in October, and what's the likelihood that this thing is going to fall right between our meetings that we don't have a chance to comment on the EIR?
I think our intent, as hopefully demonstrated tonight, I think we anticipated this type of feedback from the board, and obviously we came early on wanting to get your feedback. So we'll do the best that we can to make sure we can attend a hearing. If by any chance we're not able to actually attend a hearing during that time, we will coordinate very closely with Gail and make sure that you receive all necessary information. But we'll make a focused attempt to be here at your meeting.
Right, but without a meeting, the board would not be able to
take an action.
Well,
we will work on that in terms of scheduling and make an effort to be able to get a comment, an action from the board. If I may, our project manager from BRG would like to make some comments in support of what we've spoken to. Thank you.
Good evening, Alyssa Muto with BRG. I want to address some of your concerns with the project description that's in the NOP. I'm sure you often don't see projects until the end of the process when they're out for public review or nearing the Planning Commission or the board getting ready to approve them. This project, we put out the NOP with a very general, almost, if you think a bubble, and it would be the most impactive bubble that could occur. knowing that DGS is still working on their design plans, both for the proposed project as well as alternatives. So we wanted to come here and put out the NOP before we have any real specific designs, so we could take in the comments and really hear what the community is saying while we develop the project and the proposed project as well as the alternatives. So where it said 600 to 1,000 parking spaces, it said up to 10 stories. Just, it's the imaginary bubble of potential disturbance. What we do know is that the above ground and underground storage tanks that were removed in the early 2000s were not dealt with otherwise. The soil is contaminated. We know there's a plume. We know that remediation needs to take place. For whatever reason, the county did not move forward with remediation in 2003. What we're looking at now is, while the equipment's out there, while the disturbance is going on for the excavation for the parking structure, to clean the entire site, because it is very costly and very difficult to put in barriers that would stop the contamination throughout the site. So that's where we're coming from. We definitely, I know it seems vague now, but that's why we're here to get your comments.
Wait, can I follow up on that?
Of course, yeah.
So you're saying that the main reason for demolishing the building is because of the toxic?
That is one of the factors for doing it in phase 1. It's not the only reason. There is, as Davia mentioned, the potential to use the entire site. We're not going to hide anything. There is the county's desire is to use the site for the parking structure and a second phase, which is public-private development options. But when you have the equipment out there to do the excavation for the parking structure that is needed, and it is outside of the footprint, we think it will be, outside of the footprint of the Star Building, because you're right, it is along the perimeter of the site. It just, for purposes of cost and really the success of remediation, is to do an entire block, city block at one time.
Where were the tanks that were removed?
I don't have the exact location, but there were 5 tanks total, and there were 2 above and I think 3 underground, or vice versa.
Not at this part of the lot. They would have been somewhere else.
I don't know exactly where they were. I can't.
The building's been there.
Can you zoom in on that?
It could have been within the building, though, and I don't know for certain where they were when they did the. Pardon? We can get that information. We can provide you with the documentation concerning where those storage tanks were located. And I can check my file to see if I have that information handy. I came across it today, but I think I just scanned it. And
has there been testing done that shows that the plume is under the building?
There has been testing, and the location of the plume back in 2003, I don't know if it had reached underneath the Star Building, but it was within the site.
We would definitely need that to justify that as an excuse for.
That's for sure. Yeah.
You talk about, pardon me, contaminated soil and all of that, but if this structure was put up in 1911, I wonder how valid that is. You know, I'm sorry to say this, but I live a very different environment, and I just find collectively the society's going crazy. We're spending $5 a gallon for gas, and you think you want to build a 10-story automobile parking lot. I'd like to know what people do for a living. There's no way in hell I can afford to come down and do this kind of stuff. So I think when we throw away our history in the name of some materialistic gain because we think we're civilized, we're not really learning anything from that. But that's my personal point of view, and you take it for what it's ever worth. But, you know, I'm an old lady, and I was born and raised in San Diego County. I remember this part of the neighborhood. I just think it's terribly important that we salvage some of that, so, for whatever that's worth. So
how do you really feel?
Well, would you like to know? It is troubling. It truly is. It's troubling because you have a lot of folks who are thriving on the economic status of their so-called success. And in the final analysis, it really isn't your toys or your financial status, it's really your character and your integrity and your homage to your past. And I would pray to God that we learn something from that. So.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Vicki, comments?
My fear is this, that you have made the worst case scenario, the whole block and demolishing the building. I guess the question I would have, and being a planner and designer myself, is that's an important premise in that you're starting from. And I guess why couldn't the worst case scenario actually be, leave the building there, and then you've got a little bit different situation, and you admitted the county's goals are to have a public-private partnership, which could very easily be done in the existing building, not to the density or FAR that the county probably wants. But my concern is, how can we then automatically assume that that worst case scenario demolishes the buildings? And again, you said in your initial report that there are some conceptual plans already done, 3 stories below grade, 7 stories above. So obviously some amount of work has been done, and it's interesting. It would be interesting to me, which came first? Is it were the architects given the direction that, this building we got to get rid of because of the toxicity plume, or because of this, because of that, do what you can to get rid of the building, rather than tell the architects, here's a premise, save the building, that's our worst case scenario, go from there. I mean, so that would be something, from my standpoint, I very much agree with you, Carmen, that it's something that, and Bruce as well. I mean, this is not something that, it's not like there's 12 dozen of these around the city. This is something that's fairly unusual. So, and it's right next to the trolley station. I mean, and from a visual standpoint, I mean, it's got an awful lot of significance, and it sets the standard and the gateway visually to Little Italy as well. So I think there's some, as Carmen said, it's hard to put a number or finger on historical significance and culture and memories, and I think that's what makes a place special, and I would hate to lose that.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned that we're starting with the answer and working backwards to the question. And that somebody's got the numbers, and rather than doing an analysis of what can this parcel sustain, we're starting with this is what the parcel is, so let's go do a study. And clearly, we've all been through the process of EIRs from one aspect or another, and we know that the alternatives, the consideration of alternatives in an EIR never get the depth of attention that the proposed project, that the desired alternative gets. And I'm afraid that just from picking up on what Vicki said, what's going to happen when you start with the answer is using the whole parcel, that the real consideration to a project that preserves the building is going to get short shrift. So.
Okay, thank you. My thoughts on this, I share very strongly. I think philosophically and practically a lot of the same comments that were made here this evening. I've seen a lot of historic sites, and I have to say that this particular building is an excellent architectural example. I think this has a high degree of integrity. I do agree with one of the speakers this evening when it's a very important building. I do agree, and in my mind, that kind of it heightens the level of scrutiny that needs to go into this project. Not necessarily troubled, but I am somewhat concerned with 2 aspects of the project that I think the EIR really needs to flesh out in great detail. I do agree with Board Member Royle when he indicates that the project is rather vague, both in the first and the second phases. And for the board or for members of the public to realistically entertain the legitimacy of the project, I think that the project itself must be better further defined. And I have no doubt that you'll go back to and you'll do that in the EIR to the extent possible. Another thing that, again, I'm not concerned, but I am somewhat troubled is the concept of the funding that's going to occur later. I think what we've heard tonight is that we understand that the funding will be there down the road. But again, you know, with all of the economic chaos that this country and this world that we live in is experiencing right now, I'm not at all certain, or if I can even be made certain, that down the road that we're going to have a funding mechanism to entertain phase 2, much less even really phase 1 with the scope and the scale that's being proposed, as I understand it. So I think that, you know, Kaiser Larson probably has their work cut out for them, because in any kind of economic analysis, I think you're going to have to address a funding component to the degree possible. So if you're going to go ahead with an economic analysis, I'd like, you know, to suggest that your consultant identify and at least address the issue of funding, because I think that's going to be important. The issue of remediation, I think I'd like to find out if indeed those contaminated soils exist under the building itself. For me, that's a very important component, especially if I'm to buy into the idea that we can somehow justify demolition of the building based on the idea that the soil underneath is contaminated. I don't even know if that is the case. The building's been here since 1911, and to me it looks in pretty good shape. Now, again, I want to see a qualified study on this, but again, if you're to advance the idea of remediation and the necessity to demo the building in order to remediate the site in whole or in part, we need to have that documentation. And then you need to talk about the next thing, which is incorporating this particular building into the proposed project, either phase 1 or phase 2. If you go the phase 1 route, I'm not necessarily sure that you can't have your parking structure and retain this building in some form. I know there have been local examples that have been, in my opinion, horrible. Thinking of the Jessup's Jewelry Store building on 5th Avenue, where they just saved the facade and created a parking structure behind it. That was a nightmare. You do have some very large bays in some sections, and it's possible, I don't think it's necessarily conceivable, but it's possible that you could retain some of the facades and work around the parking structure. But again, incorporation of the building itself should be analyzed, certainly in phase 1, and most definitely in any kind of a phase 2. So I would not necessarily support a project that would come before us today that would suggest demolition based upon the level of information we have to date. I think that my personal decision is going to be based upon the professional treatments and the professional studies that you will have prepared by your consultants. And quite honestly, I think this is going to be a tough one for the county to really sell, not only necessarily this board, but also the City of San Diego's Historic Resources Board and other preservation groups and even other planning groups. So I do thank you for coming out tonight and giving us this information, and I guess we look forward to seeing you come back again at a later date and reading what you've gathered and what you've prepared.
Can I make one more comment, and that is that the trolley station adjacent to it has been redesigned, and there was an awful lot of trouble design-wise. I know because I worked on it, to actually honor, you know, the building itself, you know, the forms, and to not compete with that. And it just seems a shame that all the trouble we went to kind of respect that building is kind of all gone, you know, to waste. So I think if we can do piddly little trolley station, try to honor that building, certainly a much more significant building could do the same.